I get a phone call from my father in the middle of the night. And he tells me that my mom died. And I was very shocked by it because I just talked to them hours before. I was just like, what do you mean mom died? She's 45 years old. It's the middle of the night. I just talked to you all. Like, what could have possibly happened? And my dad said, look, I can't explain it now. Get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And unfortunately, when my plane touched down that day, I expected my dad to be there and he didn't show up that day. And instead it was my uncle and my cousin who had to deliver the news that my mom too had passed away, and that my dad too had passed away. And so not only do I lose my mom, but then my dad within several hours of each other.
Welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. This is where I interview major thought leaders from various fields of influence to show how our worldview changes everything. You can find the show everywhere podcasts are found. And would you consider, please, leaving a review on your favorite platform if you enjoy these discussions? This helps more people learn about the Dr. Jeff Show podcast and about Summit Ministries, our host. My guest today is Lauren Sisler. You may not have heard her name, but you have seen her. She is a two-time Emmy Award-winning sports broadcaster who joined ESPN in 2016 as a sideline reporter for both college football and gymnastics. Lauren is passionate about helping people understand their own story and their past so they can live healthy, flourishing lives. And her own story includes the sudden, tragic loss of both of her parents to prescription drug overdoses within hours of each other. She's dedicated to spreading awareness about the dangers of addiction, the devastation it can cause for the addict, their loved ones, and the community, and how to live a life where you can break the shackles of shame and feel free. Sounds pretty cool, right? Please welcome Lauren to the show. Lauren Sisler, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast.
What is going on? Dr. Jeff, I had to make sure I got that right. I was like, is it Jeff? Is it Myers? Is it Dr. Jeff? What is it? Dr. Jeff, here we go.
I told you at the beginning, before we went on air, that how that tradition developed is my colleague, that the two of us are operating the Summit Ministries, and his name is Jeff, and my name is Jeff. And so people kept saying, well, I talked to Jeff about this. And so finally he said, how about you be Dr. Jeff? I'll be regular Jeff.
Yeah, you gotta designate, right? And so you get the Dr. Jeff.
So I got the Dr. Jeff. So that turned out pretty well for me. But anyway, I'm really glad to have you on the show. I've been looking forward to this ever since I found out that we're going to have a chance to have a conversation. And people are going to be very excited because if they've watched college football, they've seen you doing reporting. And you have won Emmy Awards for your work in sports broadcasting, which is amazing. Football's obviously such an incredible sport because it's like a drama that gets put together in the course of, it's all happening live.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I'd love to just dig into a little, before we talk about a very serious topic that we need to address today, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your career trajectory. How did you get into sports broadcasting, and what does that even mean? How did you get to that place?
Well, what's interesting about sports broadcasting, a lot of people that I talk to in our industry, are born and 5 years old. They're standing in front of the TV commentating and with grandpa in the room, having this dream of being one of those reporters or announcers, for a specific sport at a very young age. For me, that actually wasn't the case, believe it or not. I was an athlete. I was a gymnast, but I had aspirations to be a sports doctor. So I would have had doctor in front of my name, would have, so key word.
Dr. Lauren.
Dr. Lauren.
It has a ring to it.
Yeah, Dr. Lauren, Dr. Sisler, which is kind of crazy when I think about it. So, that was a childhood dream of mine. I think just being an athlete and obviously dealing with the injuries constantly, it was always like, okay, I'd love to get athletes back out on that field of play. What can I do to, encourage, inspire that? And that was just a dream I had from a very young age. And then as I got older and maybe wiser or maybe less wise, I don't know, I started realizing like, oh, wow, like I don't know that I number one, have the stomach for it. I'm so squeamish. When injuries happen, I'm not a replay person. Do not show me the replay when that ankle is twisted backwards. I don't want to see it. I just definitely get a little bit squeamish, but, just realized, and we'll get more into my story, but I had a chain of events that happened in my life that very much kind of forced me to like pump the brakes. Okay, what are we going to do here? slow down and had to reevaluate my entire life. And I love the sports piece, realized that I love relationships and I love storytelling. So storytelling is a big piece of that for me. And so, that's kind of how I landed on sports broadcasting and, believe it or not, college football kind of being my primary sport that I cover. And it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed the journey, and it's taken a long time to get to where I'm at ESPN. Many years of blood, sweat, and tears and rejection and messing up and, having multiple blooper reels to show for it. But it's been fun. And I've enjoyed it and really just enjoyed the storytelling aspect of it and getting to bring those to the forefront and be a voice for other people and these athletes and fans and coaches that are all involved.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. We at Summit Ministries, we talk about storytelling a lot, that your life is a story, but it's part of a bigger story. It's part of God's story. And I'd love to hear how you think about what you do as storytelling, because I honestly don't meet a lot of journalists who think of their job in that way. They'll say, well, I just find the facts and I tell them, but they don't see that this is actually part of a larger life narrative.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love that question. Because first and foremost, really when I got into TV, it was kind of this thought, it's always that, ooh, look at me, I'm on TV, right? Everybody always says when they do an interview, like, hey, wave at mom and dad at home, like, mom and dad, I love you, right? And so the thought was always like, okay, I'm going to get to go cover some of the most prolific coaches and athletes in the game, and, the confetti's spraying on the field and all the excitement that surrounds championships. And it was cool because I felt like I was sort of in that competitive arena, not as an athlete, but now as a spectator and really as the reporter, right? That was my job. But what I started to realize is the voice that I had. And when these stories would come to me, a specific team or specific person or individual would come to me, I saw the response that came from it. And first and foremost from the individual themselves, right? When you have someone that's gone through something significant in their lives and, they have this opportunity to be on national TV sharing that, even if it's just a small portion of their story, because truly it's hard to tell a full story in 30, 45 a minute, minutes time. But to be able to tell those stories and to see the response from them, from the family, but really just the outside world, because a lot of times when we tune into a game, we don't always have a dog in the fight, so to speak, right? Like, so you might be cheering for a team because it's your alma mater. It's because that's the team you grew up loving, but you also might be tuning into a game and have no idea anything about either team. So my job and my goal is to bring those stories to the forefront, give people a rooting interest, and then they say, oh, wow, this guy overcame that, or he did this. And, it really fills my heart. And I feel like that's one thing that has been a big piece of my career. And it, as I mentioned, Dr. Jeff, it didn't always start out that way. It started out as kind of the woo. But when I stepped foot out on that football field, and this is always kind of how it's been, national anthems playing. When I was a gymnast, national anthem was playing. That's always when I talk to God and sort of talk through my nerves. Well, when I step foot on that field and the national anthem's playing, I put my pen down, I put everything down, and I just soak in the moment, and I pray to God, and I say, dear Lord, just bring me in this moment. Let me be present, and ultimately let me make an impact. One thing that I can do tonight to make an impact. Someone at home is listening to this story, to this, report, this broadcast, and they take something positive with them. And so that's just become my thing. And, it's been pretty cool. And I just feel like it grounds me a little bit and helps me to remember why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's not because it's what I wanted to do. It's all because of God's plan.
Yeah, that's so good. Every sporting event that I've ever watched, live or on television, I sense something going on, that the people who are participating on the field they're there for us. That's how you feel. They're there for us. Like, their victory is my victory. Their defeat is my defeat. That I feel differently about my life based on what I see taking place in front of me. I'd love to hear if there are some stories that have really stuck out to you during your career that you had the opportunity to tell.
Oh, there's many. I'm going to tell you a recent one. Ooh, this is a good one. And, it's hard because my job is obviously to be unbiased, right? I go into this, but really that's the cool part about telling stories, because like the story is the story and I don't have to take sides, right? And so there was a young man at UTSA, so University of Texas, San Antonio, and they were playing Tulane. And I had caught wind of his story, and he had a brother that was diagnosed with cancer when he was younger, had gone into remission, and then it came back very strong. And so he had spent many days and months in the hospital and was just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And as this young man's telling me the story, about his brother, and they're sitting there, and as a journalist, I want to be respectful and I want to dig into the details of the story, but only as much as they're willing to give. And so, I'm just kind of listening. And he said, one of the things I remember and why my brother is such an inspiration to me now in my playing career is I remember being in that room and the doctors basically telling us, this is it. Unfortunately, there's not anything else we can do. And, we're going to have to pull the plug. And these are, his final days. And of course, I'm choking up listening to this, and I'm trying so hard to choke back the tears because I'm like, I don't want to make him cry as I'm listening to this story. And he says he remembers his brother saying, we've already won. Because of God, we've already won. I'm going to get choked up now talking about it. Because to me, like, the victory was in it. This is a 17-year-old kid that's about to lose his life.
Yeah.
And for him to have the strength and the wherewithal to say, look, we've already won. The victory is mine. Like, wow. And he tells this story and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And, of course I'm choking back the tears and just to see this player, the way he plays for his brother, the way he exerts himself and the way that he loves the good Lord. Right. And like, you get something like that taken away from you, you can turn and walk the other way. And the fact that he was able to just own it and say, man, my brother has been such an inspiration to me and so many people. You can see the Lord continues to work in his life and so many others, through that testimony. And so I just think of that in my head. We've already won. And so no matter how far down you get, how low you get, how you feel like you're in the throes of just the deepest, darkest turmoil, God's already got your plans laid out for you. And while it seems dark where you might be at, you've already won. If you believe in God and you believe and put your full faith in him, you've already won the war. You've already won the battle. You gotta keep pushing forward. He's going to get you through it.
Yeah. On the way to the studio today, I was visiting with some of our gap year students. They had been praying for me. I just came back yesterday from Israel.
Oh, wow.
And just listening to the stories, the heartbreak of people who had a family member who was a victim of terrorism, and people whose children are hostages being held by really evil terrorists right now. And they asked me, well, do they have any hope? Do they have any hope? And I said, they don't have optimism, but they have hope. And they said, that's interesting. What's the difference? And it's probably Arthur Brooks who kind of distinguished between optimism and hope. He's a professor at Harvard. But he said optimism is a good feeling about something. Hope is a deep conviction that your actions will be used to make things turn out in a way that is right.
That's good.
I thought that's really cool.
Ooh, that is so good.
Yeah. So
yes.
that you can even you can have hope in those situations, and just think of all the people who were ministered to by you're being able to help that young man articulate his story in a way that reached all of those people who have their struggles in their lives, even as they're watching a football game.
Yeah.
Man.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, and that's, of course, one of many stories. And I just feel so fortunate when those come to me. And sometimes stories don't get told on the air because we don't get to it. The game doesn't go our way, whatever it may be. But it's amazing because these stories I try to store away. And, I've told that story to so many people now, and I get choked up every time I tell it. But, that young man's story is vibrant, and it's definitely making waves, which is really cool. And he doesn't even probably realize, how many people it's reached and the amount of time that it has just, in such a short amount of time.
Lauren, there's a story, which is why we wanted to do this show today, that you're telling of your own life. And you've got a lot going on. You've got a very busy career. You've got a young child at home. But you are getting ready, as we're recording this, to release a book. Shatterproof, right, is the name of the book. And in the book, you're telling a heartbreaking story, but something that gets right to the heart of what a lot of people in this nation are really struggling with right now. I'd love to just dive right into it, because it's going to lead into something that probably touches every single person who is watching or listening to this show right now.
Well, I appreciate that. I've actually got the manuscript sitting in front of me right now. I printed this thing out and have just marked through it and done all the things. And looking down at it, it's so surreal to see this story and my story on paper. And I think the coolest part of this whole project, and I'll start here, is I thought that I had experienced an extremely deep amount of healing a long time ago. And what I realized in writing this book, that healing has continued. And I have experienced such a deep level of healing just being able to get this on paper and to be able to share it and now voice it in such an in-depth way that's never been, shared before. And so just to kind of get into a little bit of this story, Shatterproof is basically the subtitle to it is How I Overcame the Shame of Losing My Parents to Opioid Addiction and Found My Sideline Shimmy. And so, obviously that poses a lot of questions, but the first, losing my parents to opioid addiction. And that piece of the story is kind of where it starts. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, and it was me and my brother, my mom and my dad, and we were that all-American family that seemingly had it all together, and we were doing life, and we thought we were doing life well. And my brother was a 3-sport athlete, I was a gymnast. We were checking all the boxes, right? And as far as I was concerned, the young, little, naive, energetic girl that I was, everything was great, everything was fine. And I ended up signing a scholarship to compete at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. I take great pride in being a Scarlet Knight, and was so excited to live out my dream of being a collegiate gymnast. Signed my letter of intent, went off to college, and not a day went by that I didn't talk to my parents. I was always super close with them growing up. We were a very tight-knit family, and that continued even when I went off to college. And so as I'm studying for exams, yes, my pre-med courses, that I was hopeful to be a doctor at that time, but this is obviously where I mentioned life kind of takes a turn. I get a phone call from my father in the middle of the night, and he tells me that my mom died. And I was very shocked by it, because I just talked to them hours before. I was just like, what do you mean mom died? She's 45 years old. It's the middle of the night. I just talked to you all. Like, what could have possibly happened? And my dad said, look, I can't explain it now. Get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And unfortunately, when my plane touched down that day, I expected my dad to be there, and he didn't show up that day. And instead it was my uncle and my cousin who had to deliver the news that my mom too had passed away, and that my dad too had passed away. And so not only do I lose my mom, but then my dad within several hours of each other. And as you can imagine, he gave me no explanation. And then as I'm riding in the car to my grandparents' house after learning the news that he had passed, I still had no explanation or understanding of why, what, how. Like, I don't understand. And, it would be months before we as a family would really, truly find out the actual cause through the toxicology reports. But my family is a different story than me. Mm-hmm. So my family became very aware of the circumstances, and that my parents had become addicted to their prescription drugs that they were taking for their chronic illnesses. My mom had degenerative disc disease. My father had chronic back pain and suffered from some PTSD as well. So there was some depression linked into it. Going to a pain management doctor, started off with Oxycontin. Eventually it led to fentanyl. My mom was using the fentanyl patches. They were sucking on the fentanyl suckers. And ultimately, their addiction really started to spiral, I would say, within a 3-year period. But let me tell you, Dr. Jeff, they were so good at hiding it.
Wow.
So good at sweeping it under the rug. So good at keeping it concealed, because there were many incidences, and it's really outlined in the book, how they just put on this persona that everything was okay. The finances were in disarray. Everything was a hot mess. And yet they somehow convinced us as a family that everything was okay. And so it really became a big shock to the system. And then I think ultimately you use the word overdose. You use the word addiction. And I felt I couldn't use those two words in the same sentence with both of my parents, because it was, there's just no way my parents could be either of those things. Because in my mind, I had what I thought was an addict, the profile of an addict in my mind. No way my parents could be that. No. And so I ran from it for many years because I just didn't want people to know how they died. And so I literally told a story to myself and to everyone else around me for years to avoid the truth, because I felt like if I avoided the truth, I could share the twisted truth and people would believe me. And then ultimately I believed myself, and I didn't have to face the facts of the reality that my parents were, victims of drug addiction.
There's so many questions I would love to ask you about that, but you used that word shame in your subtitle of your book, and then mentioned that you told yourself a different story. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, shame is such a key piece to all of this because of the nature of it, right? So shame is something I inherited, and much like I feel my parents inherited that shame, right? So they obviously felt the shame because they wouldn't come forward with the issues they had. They wouldn't get the help they needed. My dad overdosed at Thanksgiving. And oh, by the way, we as a family, he went to the hospital. He survived, but we thought it was a bad reaction to medication, which at the time, 17-year-old, I guess I was 18. It was my first Thanksgiving back at home. My thought is like, oh, bad reaction to medication. That in my mind was just something, dad took this medicine and it was this medicine and it paired together and it, was a bad outcome. So my parents were in the throes of it, but they did everything they could to hide from it. And I think that was the shame that they felt. They couldn't come up for air. They couldn't rise above it and ask for help and cry out for help because of maybe the shame that they felt. And I felt like that was the shame that I too inherited, because I was so fearful of the judgment. Their legacy was bound in my hands. It was up to me to preserve that at all costs.
Okay.
And I felt like if people knew the truth, they wouldn't think of my parents as the loving, supportive, unconditional love that my parents always provided for me and my brother. They would look at my parents as addicts, bad people, uneducated, all the things that we tell ourselves an addict is. But ultimately, as we learn, and I'm sure as you've provided in your education and really just bringing awareness, is addiction comes in so many sizes and shapes. And it's not just drugs and alcohol. There's so many things that we as humans can become addicted to. And ultimately, nobody is exempt from addiction. Nobody is exempt from that. And so that shame piece just set in and just had me by the neck, just a death grip on me, because I was so afraid what people would think and I would be judged by that. And so I just ran from it because I thought people would think badly of my parents and I wanted to protect them. And then I also thought they would think badly of me. Oh, wow, she comes from a family of addicts. These two people were nothing but junkies that got high, and she must be going down the same path, or susceptible to that same kind of addiction. And I thought maybe in some ways I would be discriminated or looked at differently because of that.
There's an old movie, I hesitate to even use this example, but there's an old movie where the main character says, the devil's greatest trick was convincing people that he doesn't exist. And you have this sense that they're evil things that happen. And yes, I see them. I see the person who's on meth, they're hallucinating, they're by the side of the road. That's horrible. I feel terrible for them. I don't feel like there's anything that I can do. But it causes me to sort of take all my thoughts about, well, that's what's bad is out there. The idea that things can be happening here in my space with me, with people I love, brings it way too close to home.
That's so good. That's such a good perspective, because people oftentimes, not me, never me, not my family, and they tend to shy away from it, right? I think that's such a great perspective too, because I think everyone can relate to seeing the homeless man or woman on the side of the street that, you might assume has some sort of an addiction. And like you said, that's in the outside world, not my inside world. So I think that's a really good perspective. And until people, I think that we are built on our life experiences. Like, our stories are our life experiences. And I think that we are shaped by those experiences. And truly, I believe that our life experiences, depending on how we respond, can be a gift. And as tragic as my parents' deaths were, I'm very thankful for the gift that I've been given of, I would say in many ways I feel exonerated from shame. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that came with breaking the shackles of shame, finding my voice. And really my voice came from my career as a sports broadcaster, right? For many years, even as a broadcaster, I was still running away from my story, and then saw this impact it had on people. And then I realized, like, wait a sec, like, Dr. Jeff, if you want me to tell your story, you want to go to someone that has a reputation, is credible. And I mean, I'm over here lying through my teeth, telling a big, tall tale about my parents and not the whole truth because of my fear of judgment. And yet I'm expected to tell the truth and really tell the impact piece of someone's story. And so that's when I realized, hey, girl, we gotta change course here and do something different. And it took a lot of time to get there. It was a long journey and it was a long struggle, but I will tell you, I use the word exonerated because I truly feel it's such a strong word. I feel so free. And for so many years, I felt so shackled to that shame and what my parents had gone through and everything that we lost as a family because of not only their death, but everything. And our house was taken away. I mean, everything, foreclosure, the cars were repossessed. We had nothing. And so I just lived with so much shame for so many years because the Sisler family couldn't possibly be, that was not in our world, right? That was out there, not in our world.
Yeah. Did you know that only 1% of 18 to 29-year-olds hold a biblical worldview? That means that 99 out of 100 young people you meet are held captive by counterfeit truth. But that's exactly where Summit Ministries steps in. We train over 65,000 students a year to form and to keep a biblical worldview for the rest of their lives. The transformations are remarkable, and they're lasting according to our 1-year, 5-year, and 10-year alumni surveys. But I need your help to reach more of these spiritually hungry students. Listen, for just $33, you can sponsor an hour of training for a student, and that hour can make the difference between spiritual life or death. So when you become a monthly partner, I'm going to send you stories of the students you've created opportunities for, and they're going to bless your life. And as a listener of the Dr. Jeff Show, I know you care about the rising generation. Will you help them through Summit? To donate, go to summit.org/equip. Summit.org/equip. And as a thank you, I'm going to share with you a curated collection of lectures, interviews, and videos so you can see for yourself the worldview shift that students are receiving. That's summit.org/equip. Tell us about that switch in your mind, because it takes a tremendous amount of courage to do what you did. There's so much that you feel you might be risking by telling your story. Was there sort of an inciting event or something where you just thought, no, I've got to be the one to talk about what's going on that nobody else wants to talk about?
Yeah, I think that, as I mentioned, obviously it was a progression. And I was very fortunate that when my parents passed away, my Auntie Linda, I call her, and my Uncle Mike, took me in. My Auntie Linda is my mom's older sister. And even though I was 18, I was still very much a child. I didn't know a whole lot about anything. I was always focused on schoolwork and being good in school and being good in athletics. And so, one thing that she really tried to help break down those barriers for me, and again, it took many years to do, but helped me to understand my parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they lived their lives. And to me, that was sort of the jumping off point when I realized, okay, so as I begin to share the story, because she was already starting to share it openly, but I would never let her share it in front of me. If she started telling the truth about what happened, I would shut her down. I would scream. I would kick. I would change the subject. I would get so mad at her. Why you even got to bring this up? And in many ways, I felt like she was attacking my parents, right? Attacking them because she's telling the truth about what's happening.
Yeah.
And that I think that switch flipped, when I started to realize that. And then what it took for me was to allow her to share the story, to see the response from a colleague of mine when I was working at a local TV station in West Virginia, and seeing the response was still sadness and tragedy. And I'm so sad. And I wish I could have met Lauren's parents if they're half as vibrant and energetic and lively as she is. Like, what great people. I would love to meet them. And really just, wow. And then I think the flip side of that too became the amount of people that have been through it in some way, shape, or form, have been touched by addiction. I thought I was the only one. Like, surely, this only happens in certain circles and certain groups. And then I'm realizing, like, I share that with people. My brother's going through this, my aunt, my uncle, my mom, my dad, my grandparents, the deacon of our church, whatever it may be. And I think that's when I realized that so many people are affected by this, and that we have to bring a voice to it and bring this to the forefront to keep people from running into hiding and to feeling alone in it, because that is where shame thrives, is in isolation.
It occurs to me that the words you've got in that manuscript in front of you are your words, but you're really giving words to other people to be able to say, I'm not okay.
Mm-hmm.
I am not okay. My family is not okay. There are things happening here that we need to grapple with. You don't think about that. I mean, when I write a book, I don't think, this is going to help somebody else tell their story. But the truth is, you're doing that. That's amazing.
That is my ultimate hope. Because yes, it does obviously side on the air of a memoir in some ways, because it tells the story, it goes into the depths of the story, but woven within that story are other stories that I really and truly think can relate to people. Because I think that's what I love about storytelling, is that there's always that relational piece, that connection piece. And I think that's what makes this connection is, right? You have a story, I have a story, we have stories within our story, those chapters, and that we can connect on those different levels. And that is my hope, is that when they open the book and they read it, they get a story, and, it's obviously tragic, very compelling in many ways, because it's something that I still in many ways am like, how in the world did this happen? This is just mind-boggling to me. But then I think that so many people will be able to relate on so many different levels, because again, we talk about shame, and maybe it's not shame for addiction. There's so many other things that people could be dealing with, right? Could it be, losing a job, making a poor decision, just completely whiffing on an opportunity that they thought they had within their grasp. Maybe it's an infidelity, cheating, being addicted to something outside of drugs and alcohol. There are so many things that can create shame in our lives. And I think that people walk around putting these, facades up, because if they're the leader of a company or the CEO of a company, or, out there doing life, they want to be perceived and personified as a good citizen and a good person. And here are the highlights of my life. Social media does a great job of that. Here are the highlights of my life. But underneath it all, everyone's got something. Everyone's got something they're dealing with. And I want people to understand that, like, look, we are in this together. And the more that we can speak up and speak out about it, the more that we can join hands, hug each other, and really work through these things. And again, as I said, when you can own your story and really speak up and hear the volumes of your story and the magnitude of it, I mean, I feel like a different person. And I'm so thankful because I truly believe that was a gift that God gave to me in this process. And I just wish that for everyone, because I'm telling you, when those chains start to break, you're going to be like, oh, you feel like you can just, you can overcome anything. I mean, it's really part of that resilience factor. And I just feel, when I get down, which obviously we all have things that, are disappointing and, truly stink. But I feel like it builds resilience and it builds character. And I think it's a gift.
It is a gift. That's the word that's been running through my mind right now. The gift that you have given to people. There are a lot of public figures who've written a book and told their story, how I got from A to Z, and here's the victory of it. You've instead used your platform to tell a story that gets right to the heart of something that keeps so many people bound and captive, and that is shame. Well, I want to go two different directions here. We're not afraid at Summit Ministries to talk about the nature of addiction and mental health struggles, but I'd really like to just focus on shame. You've used a couple of times this idea of breaking these chains and the freedom that you felt. Help people, because obviously you want them to get the book and hear the story and relate to it, but help people understand what do you do? How do you get to that place where you can experience that kind of freedom?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And, again, I think the one thing I learned in this process and could probably underline it, highlight it 1,000 times in this book, is that grief is not linear, right? And I think that shame and overcoming shame is not linear, right? And my therapist, that has been instrumental in helping me, and she really has brought great perspective to things, because I'm one of those now that I'm on this side of it. I want to understand the why. Okay, so why was I able to do this? Why was I able to overcome this? And I'm still learning. So trying to put it into words is still something I'm trying to really master. But, it's kind of like peeking the door open, right? So it's almost like peeking the door open, looking around the corner. Okay, what are people going to say if I share this? What are people going to do? What does this look like? And then, you get a little afraid and you kind of slam the door back shut, or you just kind of keep it cracked open. And then you make those little steps to eventually opening that door wide open and being able to walk through it, right? And so I think for me, it was those baby steps. It was that, okay, I'm going to share with one person and be honest. How does this feel? Okay, let me see how this feels. And then, I would find myself going to share with someone else and maybe sugarcoating it a little bit more or less than I had the previous. And I'm like, okay, why did I do that? And it's kind of assessing that situation, but ultimately starting out in that comfort zone, right? Of like talking to someone, having that conversation, being able to say, or maybe for some people, it's telling a complete stranger, you're dealing with something shameful. Maybe it means talking to someone that really can't have judgment on you, because at the end of the day, like, you're never going to see them again, right? You're on a plane next to somebody and it's like, okay, let's test this out. Let's test out how this is going to go, right? But then seeing that response. And I think for me, one of the key factors is when I first shared my parents' story kind of openly about 10 years after they had passed away, I never looked at the toxicology reports, refused to watch them, refused to look at them because I didn't want to acknowledge the truth. Well, when I shared it openly for the first time, like in a broadcast setting, through a feature story, I remember a colleague of my dad's reached out to me and had said that, all these years I've always wondered what happened to your parents. I've always wondered in my heart, what truly happened. And hearing this now 10 years later has given me such a peace and some sort of closure, and really just helped me to almost move past something that I felt was so devastating. But your parents loved you so much, and I can see that joy that they brought into your life, and that that unconditional love and just that support, and how you've lived your life that same way. And so when she tells me that, I'm like, wow. So her response was the exact opposite of what I thought it was going to be, was like, oh, like, I can't believe I would work next to her dad for X amount of years. And, he has this dark, dirty secret. It was the exact opposite. And really, she embraced me and my brother more after learning the truth. And so I think that, to me, is that if you just take that little leap of faith, just the littlest bit, you're going to get that response. And the thing is, you might not always get the response that you hope for or need. But I always say, you'll be surprised. And I think that if you can just take that little baby step, poke open that door little by little, eventually you're going to get to that place where you're just going to be, boo, shouted out from the rooftops. And, sometimes, to be honest with you, my husband, poor thing, has to reel me in because I'm such an open book. I'm sharing everything. Like, here we go. I've just become such an open book about everything. That's just who I am. So I really have eliminated shame, even stupid things in my life that people would be like, just things that, maybe I'd be afraid to say. I'll give an example. I get Botox, right? So a lot of people don't like to talk about Botox. And, it's one of those cosmetic things that women, like to hide from and be like, I'm not telling anybody. But for me, it's like, it's part of who I am. Like, I'm trying to stay young and vibrant and, all the things. Yeah. So, I just share that with people. But again, it is just who I am and who I've become, and I'm just so thankful for it. So I would just encourage people to really just take those small steps and have that little bit of courage. It just takes a small amount of courage just to share a little bit, and then you'll just start to see that to work, and you'll just get more and more comfortable. Because like anything else, it takes reps, right?
Yes.
And so, you just got to rep it out. As I say, as an athlete, rep it out, keep repping it out, and eventually you get to a place where you're like, whoo, I'm free, baby.
I can only imagine the freedom that brings to other people. When I've gone through difficult things and I sit down and share over breakfast, I just take somebody out to breakfast and, one of my buddies, and say, listen, this is what I'm going through. It frees them to be vulnerable.
Yes. It absolutely, you're giving them permission.
Yes. Yes,
to be
because
vulnerable.
I'm a little vulnerable, then they can be a little more vulnerable, and that vulnerability kind of scaffolds in a way that bonds us in our relationship, but also enables us to feel freedom. That this is not something I'm going to hide from anymore.
Yeah.
Wow.
So good.
The last question I had for you, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this in my mind, but I know that one of the things I see happening with the rising generation is they're all about the transparency, okay? Mm-hmm. Because they watch a TikTok video or they see something on the internet. Oh, I have a mental health struggle. Oh, you know what? I've got 5 mental health issues. And they end up being transparent in a way that enables them to feel their victimhood more, rather than to really be free.
Wow, that's a good perspective. Yeah.
Any thoughts about how to break free from that? Because transparency isn't the end goal, and getting people to feel sorry for you is not the goal.
Correct.
The goal is to express the freedom that you've experienced in a way that you hope sets other people free.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, is really good. And, as the person here, I am technically a millennial. I'm on the fringe. I'm almost 40. So I'm on the fringe of the millennial, but the Gen Z, I think one thing that's interesting, because I will admit this to you. When I went back to Rutgers after my parents passed away, went back 2 weeks later, obviously stayed on the gymnastics team, had a lot of struggles. My grades were suffering. I almost flunked out of school. Long story short, though, is I threw myself a good old pity party, right? So I really, truly, it was one of those things, I kind of used it as my excuse in life. So when I didn't want to work hard in the gym and my grades started suffering significantly, my thought was, well, who's going to fault me? My parents died, right? Like, so I got in my own mind of like, okay, like I can just skate through this and people are going to leave me alone. Well, truth be told, people left me alone for a bit of time, but then the realization came like, oh, by the way, like, you don't keep your grades up, you're getting kicked out of school. And then what are you going to do, right? Like, you have these dreams, you've worked so hard these 18 years of your life to get to where you are, and you're literally just going to toss them up in the air and like, throw it out the window. And ultimately, I'm the one that's got to take control, right? So you talk about the victim, like I can play the victim card all I want. And I think what a lot of people do and can do, and maybe this generation, as you mentioned, and my therapist helped me to visualize this, right? There's people in this world that have these bags packed, these suitcases, and they just want to empty out all that shame and all that rubble and all that mess and just sit in it, right? They just want to sit in their mess, sit in their pity, and want to stay where they're at because they're fearful of what a lot of times for people, it's kind of like ripping the Band-Aid off. It's like when you break up with that person that you probably shouldn't have been with to begin with, it hurts for a minute, but then you get to the other side and you realize like, oh crap, maybe I should have like broken up with this person a long time ago. Hey, you know what? That's the thought process here is like, pack those bags, man, because I'm telling you, if you can just get past that, get out of that pity party mode and realize that you can use this pain and this, this trial, this tribulation that you've gone through for something good, then, you become so much stronger. And I think that again, you'll find that as more events happen in your life, because they're going to happen, you build up this tolerance and this resilience, and you quit that way of thinking of like, oh, woe is me. Like, what else possibly could happen to me? No, like you strap on the boots and you put your boots on the ground and you move forward. And I think to me that you live a much more empowered life. And to me, a life with purpose instead of wallowing in it and feeling like, oh, well, this is just what's meant for me, and this is just my life. Because at the end of the day, like, you're the only one that can control your outcome. You're the only one that can control your response to something. So why do you want to live on that side of it when you can live on this side of it and be happy and free versus someone that's chained to it? Right? Who wants to be chained to anything? Come on.
That is such a good word. Well, I love that word, resilience. Thank you. It's been fun watching the trajectory of your career, and it's fun to get this the opportunity to have a conversation with you. The book's called Shatterproof, and I'm looking forward to people being able to get a hold of this because we want to experience that kind of freedom that you are talking about right there. We want to be the people who are resilient in these times.
Yes. We want you to be resilient. We want you to live a life that is shatterproof. And I think that is, something that I hope that I can gift to other people just through some experiences, some storytelling, and things that I think can be compelling. So I appreciate this opportunity. It's fun, just to kind of get back out there. My feet are back on the ground after a long football season. And, now it's time to start getting my ducks in a row as we get ready for the book launch and the book tour. And I just thank you so much for helping me spread the word and just doing all the great work that you're doing as well.
Oh, thanks, Lauren. Well, it's really been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you to my guest, Lauren Sisler, for coming on the show today. This podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. At Summit, we exist to come alongside the rising generation, their trainers, parents, and influencers, so that young people may know God's truth and become champions of a biblical worldview. So if you're looking for more resources on what it looks like to live out your Christian faith, visit summit.org/resources. You'll find all sorts of free content there. And then take a look at the Summit Ministries 11-day programs that are taking place this summer. They are filling up very quickly, and we want to be sure your loved ones are here. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Dr. Jeff Show podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. Summit equips and supports the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. If you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview as a student or reach the next generation as an educator, church leader, or parent, head over to summit.org/resources to find out about the programs, the articles, the videos, the ebooks, and more that we offer. Also, If you're looking for more great podcasts that will build your faith and inspire you, our friends at Edify have what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. Download it at edify.app, spell EDIFI. And then you can also search for it in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.